Something just happened that you need to sit with for a moment, because this is not a headline. This is a turning point in history, and it is unfolding right now in real time, with American weapons, American decisions, and American consequences attached to every single move. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, 86 years old, was killed in a joint American-Israeli military operation, a man who had ruled one of the most powerful theocracies on earth for nearly 4 decades. Gone. The opening salvo of the joint U.S.-Israeli strike was a leadership decapitation operation targeting the compound housing Khamenei's residence and office in Tehran. And then, when a reporter asked President Trump whether there was someone in Iran he would like to see lead the country next, Trump said, "Yes, I think so. There are some good candidates. Let that land." The President of the United States, publicly, on the record, signaling that America has a preferred successor for a sovereign nation's leadership. For weeks, while U.S. envoys held regular talks with Iran over a new nuclear deal, the Trump administration was amassing the largest buildup of military materiel in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The world you thought you understood on Friday morning no longer exists. The operation that began on February 28, 2026, was codenamed Operation Roaring Lion by Israel and Operation Epic Fury by the United States. And those names alone tell you something important. This was not a surgical strike. This was not a targeted warning shot. This was a full-scale, pre-planned, coordinated campaign against a sovereign nation that, the day before it started, believed it was on the verge of a historic peace agreement. That matters enormously. On February 27th, Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi announced that a breakthrough had been reached and that Iran had agreed both to never stockpile enriched uranium and to full verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency, with Iran also agreeing to irreversibly downgrade its current enriched uranium to the lowest level possible. Al-Busaidi said peace was within reach. And then, 24 hours later, the bombs fell. So you have to hold that in your mind as you watch everything unfold, because what happened here did not happen in a diplomatic vacuum. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi wrote directly to President Trump saying that negotiations had been making significant progress before the war and accusing what he called an America Last faction of derailing the talks, writing, "Israel first always means America last." Whether you agree with that framing or not, the underlying timeline is real. There were talks happening, there was movement, and then there was war. The question of who wanted peace more and who decided that peace was not the goal is not a minor footnote. It is the story. The stated goal of the U.S. and Israeli strikes was to induce regime change in Iran and to address concerns regarding its nuclear program. But the public messaging from the Trump administration was contradictory almost from the very first day. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth told reporters on Monday, "This is not a so-called regime change war. But the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it." Read that sentence twice. Because what Hegseth is doing there is extraordinary. He is simultaneously denying that regime change was the mission and celebrating regime change as an outcome. He is saying, in the same breath, that they did not do the thing they absolutely did, and nobody in that briefing room seemed to blink. Now, by the 5th day of the conflict, U.S. forces had struck nearly 2,000 targets in Iran, and the death toll was staggering. After 4 days of fighting, Iran's Foundation of Martyrs and Veterans Affairs reported that over 1,000 people had been killed in U.S.-Israeli attacks, with thousands more wounded. These are not numbers from a limited operation. These are numbers from a war. A real war, and American pilots are flying those missions. American weapons are hitting those targets. American soldiers are dying in the retaliatory strikes. The U.S. military confirmed that its death toll from the conflict rose to 6 after 2 bodies were recovered from a regional facility struck by Iran. 6 American service members gone in a war that Congress never voted on, never authorized, and was never fully briefed about in advance. The conflict also spread to Lebanon, where Israel carried out an intense bombardment, and across the entire Gulf region. Iran launched strikes across 9 countries, hitting Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Not because those countries chose to be part of this war, but because American military bases sit on their soil. Iranian missiles targeted the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet in Bahrain's Jufair area multiple times. Bahrain's international airport was targeted with a drone. and several residential buildings in the capital Manama were struck by Iranian drones. Qatar, an American ally that hosts one of the largest U.S. military installations on Earth, had to scramble its air defenses over its own capital city. The Qatari Prime Minister demanded an end to the attacks in a direct phone call with Iran's foreign minister, essentially begging a country it is not at war with to stop bombing its territory because of American decisions made in Washington. A U.S. submarine fired a torpedo and sank an Iranian frigate, the Iris Dina, in the Indian Ocean off the south coast of Sri Lanka, expanding the war zone. Think about where Sri Lanka is on a map. We are now in the Indian Ocean. This conflict has already traveled from the streets of Tehran to the waters off a South Asian island nation. Sri Lanka's Navy said it had recovered 87 bodies and rescued 32 people from that sinking ship. 87 bodies in the Indian Ocean in a war that started 8 days ago. And then there is the nuclear dimension, on which cannot be understated. The Natanz nuclear facility was struck during the military operations, though Iranian media reports that no radioactive leakage was recorded. But the UN's nuclear watchdog chief stated that no evidence had been found that nuclear facilities had been hit from these attacks, a statement that conflicts with what we know from Israeli and American military briefings. Meanwhile, Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs warned that Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant was under threat from U.S.-Israeli airstrikes, and that explosions could be heard not far from its perimeter. The possibility of a nuclear accident, not a nuclear weapon, but a reactor breach, in the middle of a live shooting war is something that is not getting nearly enough attention in the American media right now. It deserves more than a single sentence. It deserves a full reckoning. Israeli officials said their intelligence indicated Iran could have enriched uranium to 90%, or weapons grade, within 2 weeks if it had decided to do so before the strikes launched over the weekend. That was the rationale. That was the clock they were watching. And Trump defended the decision to launch the war on those grounds, saying there would have been a nuclear war without the intervention. But here is what is also true. Iran had, the day before the bombs fell, agreed to never stockpile enriched uranium and to submit to full international inspection. So either those assurances were not trusted or they were never the real point. Both possibilities are deeply important and deeply troubling. Now let us talk about Trump and the succession question, because this is where the story takes a turn that is almost without precedent in modern American history. Trump told Reuters in a telephone interview on Thursday, "We want to be involved in the process of choosing the person who is going to lead Iran into the future. We don't have to go back every 5 years and do this again and again. Somebody that's going to be great for the people, great for the country," the President of the United States, on the record, saying America will have a role in choosing who leads Iran, not suggesting it behind closed doors, not quietly signaling to intelligence partners, saying it out loud to a wire service that transmits to every newsroom on the planet. Trump said of Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of the assassinated supreme leader who has emerged as a frontrunner for succession, "They are wasting their time. Khamenei's son is a lightweight. I have to be involved in the appointment, like with Delcy in Venezuela." There it is. Venezuela. That is the template Trump is working from. In January, Trump authorized a military attack on Venezuela that culminated with the abduction of then-President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez then assumed power, and Trump has pointed to that outcome, a foreign government restructured by American military force, as a model for what can and should happen in Iran. That is not a metaphor. That is stated policy. From the President of the United States, about the most populous country in the Middle East. Trump told reporters Wednesday that Iranian leadership keeps dying. Their leadership is rapidly going. Everyone that wants to be a leader ends up dead, he said. It is worth sitting with the tone of that statement. Not alarm, not gravity, not the measured weight of a commander-in-chief reflecting on the enormous consequences of war. Matter of fact, almost casual. As though the systematic killing of a government's leadership structure is simply a logistical observation rather than a geopolitical earthquake that will send tremors across the next several decades. Trump himself acknowledged the depth of the succession crisis, saying, "The attack was so successful it knocked out most of the candidates. It's not going to be anybody that we were thinking of because they are all dead. Second or third place is dead. Second and third place, dead. The people who are going to lead one of the largest nations on earth, gone, and a building housing 88 members of Iran's Council of Experts was bombed while they were counting votes for Khamenei's replacement, according to Axios. The actual people whose constitutional responsibility it was to choose a new supreme leader bombed while they were doing exactly that job. That is a targeted disruption of a sovereign nation's constitutional process. That is not something that has a modern precedent. The CIA had assessed, before the strikes, that several figures in the IRGC were potential successors to Khamenei. However, many of these potential successors and their supporters may have now been killed, and the IRGC may be blamed for continuing Iranian setbacks, meaning a leader may be less likely to be drawn from that group, which means the United States has, deliberately or not, narrowed the field of possible Iranian leaders by killing the most likely candidates. And now Trump is saying he wants to be involved in choosing from whoever is left standing. The logic of this, if you follow it to its conclusion, is that America is engineering the political future of Iran through military force and assassination. And the president is not hiding it. He is saying it openly. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the U.S.-Israeli strikes as squandering an opportunity for diplomacy and condemned both their actions and the counterstrikes of Iran. The UN Security Council met in emergency session on February 28, 2026, though there was no resolution or vote on the military action. No resolution, no vote. Because the structure of the Security Council, the veto power held by the United States, makes it constitutionally impossible for the international community to formally condemn American military action through that body. The system designed to hold powerful nations accountable cannot function when the most powerful nation is the one whose actions need to be checked. That is not a theoretical problem. That is the moment we are in right now. U.S. and Western officials stated that the U.S. and Israel had successfully destroyed a significant portion of Iran's military capabilities. And with air supremacy achieved, Israeli and U.S. jets were able to fly uncontested over Iranian territory. That is a military victory by those metrics. But military victory and strategic success are not the same thing. And history has taught that lesson over and over, from Baghdad to Kabul to Tripoli. Defense Secretary Hegseth appeared at the Pentagon and declared, "America is winning," stressing that the operation was only 4 days old and that metrics were shifting, dust was settling, and more forces were arriving. More forces arriving. The dust is still settling. The war is still spreading. The successor to the supreme leader of Iran has not been named. The region is on fire. And the President of the United States wants a seat at the table when Iran decides who its next leader will be. Iran has threatened global shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes. If Iran follows through on that threat, the price of oil does not go up 10%. It goes up in ways that reshape economies, spike inflation, and hit every working American at the gas pump and in the grocery store. The war in Iran is not happening far away. The economic consequences of what is unfolding right now are heading toward every American household, whether or not they are following the news. Iran's counterstrikes have disrupted oil flows across the Middle East. The war has rattled financial markets, with most taking their cues from what the price of oil is doing, and early Thursday oil prices resumed their ascent. This is what war in the Persian Gulf does to the world economy. The interconnection is not abstract. It is a number on a gas pump. It is a grocery bill. It is an interest rate decision. Every American is already inside this story, whether they know it yet or not. The question is not whether this affects you. The question is whether you understand how it is affecting you and who made the decisions that put you there.